let's start the forge. Welcome to Burning Metal. This is your host and Forge Master Gmetal, coming to you with another burn point. It's metal. We know what we're talking about. We're going to talk about the background, the setting, and why do we even care about it. We're going to get into the nitty and gritty on settings for sure. It's important. We're going to tell you why. We're going to forge this section for you guys. Are you ready? Is the forgers on the other end ready for this heat? Listen, we're all here. We're all ready. Let's start this forge the right way, and we got it. Time to cool the blade. So, in stories, when we think of a story, we think of character, we think of everything there. The one thing we think of almost is the setting. Now, the setting is super important because it's the first thing we think of when we think of an idea, but when we actually look at the story, we forget it's actually a thing sometimes, right? So, in creating a story, we create everything. And the setting is one of the most important things you ever make. Think about it. Settings are the number one thing that identifies a story as a story. As in, sci-fi generally identifies with outer space, future, cyberpunk stuff. That's sci-fi. And why is it sci-fi? The setting. It's not regular life. Settings are often settings for the fact that, like in real life, you think about it, you are shaped by your environment, your upbringing. If you're raised in a city, you act different than if you are raised in a suburb than if you're raised in the country. Everything you do, think, and feel is something different. Everything will move differently for you. Like, if you talk about New York City, I love New York City. I live in New York City. It's a great place, right? But I've heard so many people say it's too fast. It's too cramped. There's some silence right there. I don't know if you hear it or not. But it's too fast. It's too cramped. It's too this, too that. People raised here versus people who come here by choice is different, right? And it's just a beautiful thing for each setting. So when you write a story, you really think about the ramifications of each story. The beauty of the setting is people grow up there. You expect a certain action, a certain reaction, and if you have an odd character or someone who isn't from there, then they'll react the way you expect. So settings are very much made for this eccentric. It pretty much sets who's normal and who's not normal. If you're from there, you act the way you're supposed to act. If you're not, you're not, right? Everything's a different thing in your setting. And for so long, you just think about, I don't know, like, settings moves. It gives you the undertone of the thing you need. It gives you undertone for everything you need to know. How do I say this? Like, it gives you context of why certain characters without the author or writer having to explain it to you right away. Like, if you see a street character acting a certain way, you can infer it's because he was born in certain parts of the city. Because everyone knows, and people in New York, yes, people in New York are the same in one way, but then when you bury into it even more, they're even more different. The boroughs exist for a reason, right? Everyone acts a little different anyway. So, it's safe to say that settings matters in real life, so does in stories. And if you think about it, Star Wars wouldn't be Star Wars if you just put it on Earth. It'd be a fantasy story. That's what it is. It'd be fantasy. Medieval fantasy times. But it's in space, so it's sci-fi. Sci-fi fantasy. That's what's getting into genres here. But the point is, settings will make or break a story in where it's at. Some people don't like sci-fi, so they'll never watch a movie, read a book about space. And that's their prerogative. But again, the setting will determine who reads, watches, and everything. It's very much an important thing. Such as my last episode of Burn Point, I talked about Warrior. And the setting was an important factor to it because it was a 1870 time period where I didn't know about the certain event that was happening, right? An event was happening, like a certain time period for the Chinese immigrants was happening in 1870s to the 1920s. So I didn't know about that, and it only happened between those years. Setting matters. It's a great thing. And you know what? Stories are stories, and you need to put all your pieces together. Time to grind. There are two types of settings, literally speaking. There is backdrop and integral setting. Now, a backdrop is more akin to an imagination, a in-your-head type story. Think like Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh could happen right now, and it could have happened in the 1900s. And no difference would have been Winnie the Pooh story, right? The setting for a backdrop is more of akin, like I said, imagination. So imagine imagination being what it is, and as letting you know this story will be what it is, no matter where you're at, no matter what you think, this story will not be changed by its environment. And yeah, Winnie the Pooh, anything imaginary, because you will always have a place in the 100-acre woods, guys. But technically, Winnie the Pooh is set in a storybook, so there is a setting there, kinda. Now, let's talk about the integral setting. The integral setting is pretty much essentially what I've been saying. It determines how the story is gonna go and where it moves. The setting doesn't always affect the story as much, if you think about it, but the setting will always, to a degree, always affect the story. Some 100% and some 10%, 20%, 30%, maybe just 5%, but you just gotta think of it like that. So some of the integral parts are events. If you revolve a story around a particular event in history or time, right? The event of that time period will be what the story is trying to tell you. The themes is trying to tell you outright. The things that the author doesn't have to tell you to have it click with the audience. If you say the Old West saloon, a saloon moment, a fictional event or a real event, doesn't matter. Everyone's stuck in a hotel in the Old West, an event, or the carnival of the future, like how Marvel did for Tony Stark's dad, his introduction into Captain America, the days of tomorrow, so on and so forth, right? Also, just like I said, location could be a setting as well. A saloon, a graveyard, a phone booth. Watch the movie Phone Booth. It's a great movie. Phone booth, a church, right? Horror movies always done in churches and old houses. Trust me, when you watch a horror movie, you know what kind of haunted house you're going into. There's just so much setting-wise that location and events can tell you. Also, time periods. Why? Time periods, if you tell someone you're making a story around 1860s, that's Civil War time period. People know that. Or the 1500s, the 1400s. Each one has its own connotation of each thing, right? It's a connotation of events and moments. In fact, BC versus AD. BC is before Christ, and AD, I always forget what AD stands for. But it's after Christ or whatever. Even though it's not AC, but it's AD. Those moments will change how you view the event. So if I were to make a story in the future with robots and in a city, cyberpunk. If I was to make a story in the future with robots, dystopian, with a dictator, yeah. But there are certain elements that make each setting something different, right? So there's just so many things you could say. Themes, the area of your thing. So location, area, about the same thing. It affects the characters in so many ways that you can't ignore the setting. Like you're not gonna have an 1800s English girl in a 2020 movie about robbery. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't feel right. It's gonna be funny, but it's not gonna be something people can relate to off tops, right? So I think settings set up our initial thoughts of the story without us having to be told about these moments, right? Oh, Old West? Awesome. Oh, sci-fi? Awesome. 1800s? Awesome. 2000? Awesome. Sci-fi fantasy? Awesome. All those things come into play. Let's test the fires. What is one of the best stories I have ever watched, read, or heard about setting? Easy. It is Dorarawa. It is a weird name, trust me, I know. But it's an anime, and I want to say a light novel. I don't think it's a manga, but I want to say it's a light novel from Japan. That the whole point of the story is the crazy stuff that happens in the city. And it's almost like a magic spell, so to speak. That the city itself attracts unique and different people to interact with in itself. Because no matter how crazy the story gets in the story, right? No matter how crazy it gets trust me, it gets pretty crazy. No matter how crazy it gets, the story always reverts back to, by the end of the season, or the end of the chapters, this is how this city moves. Such as, in this anime, the Headless Horseman is a bike-riding motorcyclist enthusiast who's looking for her own head, and she is dating a mad scientist like Frankenstein. That's just one part of it. Another part of it is there's a guy who's dressed like a bartender who's muscle for other people, right? He does other stuff, but he's essentially in the city, and if you ever walk into him, bump into him or something, he's like the Hulk of strength. Another fascinating storyline is the Demon Sword storyline. Magic demon swords. Not just the Headless Horseman, but magic demon swords. And guess what? There's more. More storylines about gangs, about this, about that. The story of the city is that it attracts magically into it. Sort of like the way I feel about New York City. It has a certain magic, a certain flair to it when you're here. And for me, I've lived here for almost 4 years. Maybe 4 years. I'm not really sure right now. But there's a magic to it. And this story, Dorarawa, really emphasizes on how much this city attracts these kinds of people. For the first, I want to say, season, Mikado was there because he wanted to make a name for himself in something, right? Wanted to do something. You know, like every young farm boy wants to do. But in the same sense, you have the Headless Horseman looking for a head in this city. And mad scientist who helps the mob out. You got an information broker who's this crazy young dude who's just running around just messing with people because he's bored. He's there because other people are more interesting. And he likes to mess with interesting people. Overall, the story's about the city and the life in it. The kind of life you can only have in this city. It's a 10 out of 10 anime, so you should watch it. But Dorarawa is the #1 show, anime, manga, story, whatever, that fits the narrative. That the setting is the #1 thing. The city's the main character. The setting is the main character. And everyone else is just a part of the game. Not even really there, but they're a part of the game of the city. They move how the city wants people to move. It's a sort of magic you can't explain unless you live it. Just like every other community out there, it's a beautiful thing. You should watch that anime. Perfect example of it. Forger's Last Stand. Settings are such an important thing to storytelling because it gives you context. Context is king for setting. You get a setting, people expect it. You know what I'm saying? It just goes hand in hand together. There's just so many important things that come from a setting that the author doesn't have to tell you that it makes sense to think about your setting well. As a writer, the setting and characters are probably the most important things because events work around all those things. The way people grow in a certain environment is where you plan to go. It's kind of like an organic way of living. Because we live life in a certain way. The real world is you move somewhere, you adapt to that place, you become a better person to live there, who lives there. Then if you move somewhere else, you adapt to that place. That's why setting is important. Setting is king. It makes everything realistic, even in a non-fiction, even in a fiction setting. Even in a fiction setting. People understand change within the environment. If people have moved before, they understand the differences are. moving from the suburbs to a city or city to a suburbs or a country, and so on and so forth. In fact, settings are even plots. Some plots are literally, I move from the city to the country. Drastic difference, and the characters have to shift and change. Like, the outsider trope comes from the fact that the setting isn't his organic setting. And it's a way to move the story along. It lets us connect with characters. Like, if the character's meant to be there, we understand why. If the character's not meant to be there, then we sympathize with them. We feel like that, man, I wouldn't fit there either, huh? Or he doesn't belong here. And it helps the viewpoints of everyone. No story will ever be objective, because stories are meant to be seen from the eyes of the people in a setting, instead of a person in a single universal area. No such thing. The setting is an important factor. For sure, there's nothing you can say about that. The setting is king on this. It's a beautiful thing, as I said before, but also a very important thing. Always know where your setting is, so you know how to write, where to write, and what you're trying to pull off. This is the key of the setting. Now, thank you for everyone who listens to the podcast. This is your host and Forge Master, Gmetal, and to all of you, if you want an idea out there for my socials, I told you before, anything like that, and guys, just be metal. Go out there, be your best, and I can't wait for more episodes to come out. I'm sure you can't either. Rock on and be metal, bro.